I'll never forget the call. My son's voice trembled as he said, "I'm getting married tomorrow and I withdrew all your money." I sat frozen, staring at the phone, my heart hammering in disbelief. How could he just take everything without telling me? I had to know why, and I knew somehow this was only the beginning of a story I would never forget. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I remember the morning like it was yesterday. The sky was still dim, the first streaks of dawn brushing across the city, and I had just settled into my favorite chair with a steaming cup of tea. The aroma of chamomile filled the quiet kitchen, mingling with the faint smell of toast, slightly burnt at the edges. I had just taken a sip when my phone rang, the screen lighting up with a number I recognized instantly. My son, Amir. I hadn't expected him to call this early, and something in that early morning stillness made the ring feel louder, more urgent. When I answered, his voice came out in a rush, almost panicked, and I could feel the tension vibrating through the line. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the hesitation behind the words. I'm getting married tomorrow, and I withdrew all your money." I sat frozen, staring at the phone, my heart hammering in disbelief. How could he just take everything without telling me? I had to know why, and I knew somehow this was only the beginning of a story I would never forget. I remember pacing the kitchen, my slippers scraping softly against the tiled floor, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and fear. The tea had gone cold, forgotten on the table, and the toast had burnt further in my distraction. Questions kept repeating themselves in my mind. How much had he taken? Was it everything? Could I trust him to fix this? Or had something inside him shifted, something I didn't see coming? I could feel tears brimming, but I swallowed them down, knowing that showing panic might make him retreat further into excuses or guilt. I had to stay calm, at least enough to hear him out, to understand why the boy I had raised with so much care and patience had chosen this path. As he spoke, I caught glimpses of his emotions, fear, guilt, maybe even excitement, tangled together in a way that made me ache. He wasn't trying to hurt me, at least not intentionally, but the impact of his actions was undeniable. I felt the weight of years of trust, of lessons and shared experiences, all colliding with the reality that tomorrow he would walk into a new life without fully including me in the planning. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional, a fracture in the bond I had assumed was unbreakable. I tried to picture him as the boy who had once clung to my hand on his first day of school, the teenager who had cried in my arms after his first heartbreak, the young man who had promised he would always make me proud. How could all those years fit into this single shocking act? The thought was suffocating, but beneath the hurt, I knew there was still a chance for understanding, for explaining. I had to hear him out, even if every instinct screamed at me to hang up the phone and demand answers later. The call ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me staring at the phone, heart racing, the morning sun casting shadows across the kitchen. I sank back into the chair, the cup of tea untouched, the burnt toast staring back at me like a silent witness. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of uncertainty I hadn't known since Amir was a small boy. I had always thought that love and guidance would shield him from mistakes, from misjudgments, from decisions that could hurt those he loved. Yet here I was, facing a reality I hadn't imagined. My son, about to enter marriage, and I was left out, blindsided, questioning everything I thought I knew about him. I spent the next hour moving through a fog of emotions, anger, fear, disbelief, and a cautious hope that there was more to the story than he had let on. Every detail I noticed in the apartment, the faint smell of his cologne lingering from a recent visit, the sound of distant traffic outside, even the way the sunlight caught the edge of the table, it all seemed to amplify the surreal nature of what had just happened. I realized with a deep, sinking certainty that tomorrow would not be just another day. It would be the day that tested the bonds of trust between us, that forced us both to confront the weight of choices and the depth of familial love. And yet, somewhere deep in the turmoil, I knew that no matter how shocking, how sudden, there was a story waiting to be told, a lesson waiting to be learned, and a truth about my son that I had yet to understand. The rest of the morning passed in a strange blur. I tried to focus on mundane tasks, washing the dishes, folding laundry, even checking my emails, but every sound, every movement brought me back to that call. Amir's words echoed in my mind. "I withdrew all your money." My stomach twisted at the thought. How much? Why? And most importantly, why hadn't he told me sooner? I could picture him pacing in his apartment, phone pressed to his ear, speaking with that mixture of panic and conviction that I knew all too well. By late morning, I could no longer sit still. I pulled on my coat and decided to drive to his apartment. The city was waking up, streets slowly filling with cars and the hum of early commuters. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, feeling the tension rise with every red light. I kept rehearsing what I would say, calm, measured, but firm. I needed to understand why he had taken such drastic steps without consulting me, without warning me, without even a hint of the chaos it would create in my own life. When I arrived, Amir's apartment looked exactly as it always had, neat, carefully organized, but with small signs of life scattered here and there, an open book on the coffee table, a pair of shoes haphazardly left near the door. I knocked softly, and he opened the door, looking tired and guilty, his hair slightly messy from a night of restless thought. His eyes met mine, and I could see the weight of his decision reflected there. "Mom," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't mean for it to hurt you. I wanted to reach for him, to wrap him in reassurance, but the shock was still fresh and the anger simmered beneath the surface. Amir," I said, keeping my voice calm but steady, "we need to talk now. I need to understand everything, every reason, every thought that led to this." He nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment smelled faintly of brewed coffee, the kind he liked, and the soft light of the morning sun streamed through the windows. We sat at the small kitchen table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I studied him, his nervous fidgeting, the way his hands twisted together, the slight tremor in his voice when he finally spoke again. It's complicated," he said finally. "I didn't want to worry you. I didn't think you'd understand." I could feel my chest tighten. "Amir, I've always tried to understand, but taking all the money without even a conversation? You don't get to decide that alone. That's not how trust works." He flinched slightly at my words, and I softened, seeing the boy I had raised, flawed and human, trying to do something he thought was right. He took a deep breath. "I wanted a simple wedding, Mom. No pressure, no big crowds, nothing extravagant. I thought I could make it happen quickly, quietly. And then—" His voice broke, and he looked down at his hands. "I ran out of time and I panicked. I made a mistake. I thought if I took care of it all, you'd be proud, not upset." I stared at him, the anger still there, but now mixed with a profound sadness and understanding. He had acted out of love, misguided and reckless, but love nonetheless. I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. They were warm but shaking. Amir, love isn't measured by money or how quietly you do things. Love is honesty and trust and letting people in, especially your family. You didn't have to do this alone. You could have asked me. You should have asked me. His eyes glistened, and I could see the weight of realization settling over him. I know, Mom. I know I messed up. For a while, we just sat there, hands intertwined, the hum of the city outside fading into background noise. I realized how much I had missed him in the rush of daily life, how much I had assumed I knew his thoughts and feelings. This act, shocking, reckless, and heartbreaking, had forced both of us to confront the depth of our relationship, the unspoken expectations, and the fragility of trust. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time. I want you to come tomorrow. I don't just want you to know about it. I want you there. I need you there. I didn't think I could tell you the truth and have you still support me. I squeezed his hands, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering hurt. I'll be there, Amir. I'll be there, but we're going to do this together, the right way, and no more secrets. Understood? He nodded, a small, tentative smile breaking through his worry. Understood. In that moment, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly. The shock was still there, the betrayal still lingering, but beneath it, I could see a path forward, a chance to rebuild, to forgive, to teach, and to learn. We spent the rest of the morning planning together, calmly, carefully, with open conversation for the first time in what felt like years. I realized then that sometimes the worst moments in life, the shocking, heart-wrenching moments, carry within them the seed of understanding and growth. Amir made a mistake, yes, but he had also shown courage in admitting it, in facing the consequences, and in wanting me by his side despite everything. By the time I left his apartment, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, warming the streets and spilling light into the shadows. I felt a mix of exhaustion and hope, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, but also an opportunity for connection, for empathy, and for the kind of love that isn't perfect, but is enduring. The rest of that day passed slowly, almost in a haze. I tried to return to my routines, to busy myself with small familiar tasks, but every sound of my phone made me flinch. What if there was another call, another revelation waiting on the other end? My mind kept drifting back to Amir's words, to the sound of his voice, urgent yet hesitant, when he told me he had withdrawn the money. I kept picturing him, pacing in his apartment, wrestling with guilt and anxiety, and I realized how little I truly understood the pressures he faced as a young man stepping into marriage. By evening, I decided I needed to talk to someone, a friend who had raised her children and understood the delicate balance between love and discipline. I called my old neighbor, Mrs. Kareem, whose soft voice and wise perspective always helped me see clarity in chaos. I told her everything, trying to hold back tears, my voice cracking in places I didn't even realize were trembling. He's my son, I said, and I can't help but feel betrayed, but I don't want to break him. I just don't know what to do. There was a pause on her end, the kind of thoughtful silence that carries weight. Finally, she said gently, sometimes love means letting them stumble and fall, but being there to catch them even when it hurts. He needs you, and he's asking for your trust back. Don't let anger blind you from seeing his heart. Her words sank deep, mingling with the swirl of emotions inside me. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the city outside my window, the occasional car passing by, my mind replaying every detail of the morning. I thought about the money, yes, but more than that, I thought about trust, about communication, about the fragile threads that tie a parent and child together. I realized that the real lesson wasn't about the financial mistake. It was about understanding, about empathy, about stepping into his shoes and seeing the world as he saw it, at least for a moment. The next morning arrived too quickly. The sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I brewed a cup of tea, the familiar scent grounding me, and I dressed quietly, trying to collect my thoughts before heading to Amir's apartment. The city was alive with morning traffic, the air crisp and faintly scented with winter blooms, and every step toward him felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. I wasn't sure what awaited me, what surprises, what revelations, or what confrontations, but I knew I had to be present fully for my son and for myself. When I arrived, Amir opened the door before I could even knock. His face, tired but determined, broke into a nervous smile. "You came," he said simply. His eyes reflected relief, gratitude, and a hint of lingering fear. "Of course," I replied, stepping inside. "We'll face this day together, Amir. No more secrets, no more surprises." The apartment smelled faintly of fresh flowers, arranged carefully around small corners of the living room, and I noticed the subtle touches he had prepared for the wedding. It wasn't lavish, but it was thoughtful, personal, and intimate, a reflection of the man he was trying to become. We spent the morning moving through final preparations, and as we worked, I noticed something remarkable. Amir wasn't just panicked or guilty, he was learning, listening, adjusting. He asked questions, sought advice, and for the first time in a long while, we were working together as a team rather than living in parallel worlds of misunderstanding. The tension from the previous day was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. It had shifted into something more manageable, something that could be healed with patience, conversation, and compassion. Around noon, a quiet calm settled over us. We sat together, sharing a simple meal, and I watched him eat, noticing the familiar habits I had always loved, the way he carefully buttered his bread, the slight hesitation before he drank his tea. These small, mundane details reminded me that despite mistakes, despite shocking actions, he was still my son. The foundation of our relationship wasn't destroyed. It had been tested, stretched, and challenged, but it was still there, waiting for repair and understanding. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time, filled with reflection. "Mom, I wanted to make it right, in my own way. I see now that I rushed, that I acted selfishly even though I thought I was protecting everyone." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his, feeling the warmth of connection, the silent acknowledgement of mutual respect. "Amir," I said, "what matters now isn't what's been taken or lost, it's what we do next. We can fix this. We can rebuild trust, together." His eyes glistened with tears, and he nodded, the weight on his shoulders lightened, if only slightly. The day continued with small acts of collaboration and understanding. I guided him through some of the financial and practical details he had overlooked, helping him navigate tasks he hadn't realized were part of planning a wedding. In doing so, I felt a sense of empowerment, not as a parent controlling every aspect, but as a partner in helping him grow, guiding without judgment, supporting without enabling mistakes. The dynamic between us was changing, evolving into something more mature, more honest, more resilient. By late afternoon, the city seemed to slow down, the shadows lengthening across the streets, and I realized that tomorrow would indeed be a pivotal moment, not just for Amir's wedding, but for our relationship as mother and son. There would still be lessons to learn, apologies to make, and emotions to navigate. But in this quiet, ordinary moment, I felt a sense of clarity. The mistakes, the shock, the panic, they were all part of a journey toward understanding, empathy, and ultimately reconciliation. As evening approached, a quiet settled over Amir's apartment.
The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows along the walls, and the faint hum of traffic outside was oddly comforting. We sat together on the worn couch, cups of lukewarm tea in hand, and I could see the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. For the first time since that fateful phone call, there was a sense of calm, a fragile, tentative calm, but a relief nonetheless. I realized then that sometimes the moments after a storm are just as important as the storm itself. They're the moments where understanding begins to root, where trust starts to rebuild, and where hearts, though shaken, find their rhythm again. Amir finally spoke, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Mom, I'm scared," he admitted. His hands fidgeted in his lap. "Not about the wedding itself, but about us, about you, about how you see me now." I reached over and placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "Amir," I said softly, "I love you. Mistakes don't erase that. They don't define you. What matters is that you learn, that you take responsibility, and that you let people in." His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and I could see the weight he had been carrying slowly lift, even if just a little. He swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. I didn't know how to do it right. I panicked and I thought I could fix everything myself. I thought if I handled it, no one would get upset. But I see now. I see how wrong I was. His voice trembled slightly, but it was filled with honesty, raw and unfiltered. I nodded, letting the silence between us carry the weight of his confession. There was no need to fill it with words. The truth hung in the air, palpable and undeniable. We talked long into the evening, not just about the money or the wedding, but about life, choices, and the unexpected paths that sometimes lead us astray. I listened as he shared fears he had never voiced before, the pressure to succeed, the anxiety about failing those he loved, the desire to make everything perfect. And as I listened, I realized that the shocking act of withdrawing the money, while hurtful, was also a cry for help, a plea for guidance, and an expression of love. Misguided, yes, but love nonetheless. By the time I left his apartment that night, the city had quieted, and the streets were bathed in the gentle glow of streetlights. I felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope, a recognition that our relationship had been tested in a way I had never imagined, but also an understanding that this test had brought us closer in unexpected ways. The shock of the call, the betrayal, and the frantic mourning were now memories tinged with lessons, with the possibility of forgiveness, and with the knowledge that trust, though fragile, could be rebuilt. The next day arrived with a crispness in the air that felt symbolic, as if nature itself was acknowledging a new beginning. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple outfit that felt comfortable yet presentable, and made my way to the small wedding venue Amir had chosen. It wasn't lavish or extravagant, but it was warm and intimate, filled with the quiet beauty of personal touches and thoughtful details. As I stepped inside, I could see Amir, dressed neatly, pacing nervously. When he spotted me, his face lit up with a mix of relief and gratitude. "You came," he said simply, and in that moment I knew that despite everything, we had arrived at a place of understanding, of connection, and of shared purpose. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. As Amir exchanged vows with his bride, I watched closely, noticing the subtle expressions, the small gestures that revealed character, intention, and love. I realized that life often presents us with moments of shock and confusion, moments that challenge our patience and our ability to forgive. But within those moments also lie opportunities for empathy, for growth, and for the deepening of bonds that matter most. After the ceremony, we gathered for a modest celebration. The laughter, the stories, the shared joy, it all felt like a balm to the wounds of the past days. Amir pulled me aside, and we shared a quiet moment together, away from the crowd. "Mom," he said earnestly, "thank you for being here, for understanding, even when I made it so hard. I promise I'll never take your trust for granted again." I hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth and sincerity in his words. "I know, Amir, and I promise to always be here, no matter what. That's what family is." As the evening wound down, I reflected on everything that had happened: the shock of the call, the betrayal, the frantic mourning, and the ultimate reconciliation. Life had a way of throwing us into moments that test our hearts, that force us to confront our fears and our assumptions. But it also gave us the chance to rise above hurt, to extend grace, and to find beauty in the imperfections of those we love. Walking back home that night, I felt a deep sense of closure, not because everything had been perfect, but because understanding had been achieved, trust had been acknowledged, and love had been reaffirmed. Amir made mistakes, yes, but he also showed courage, honesty, and a willingness to learn. And in turn, I had learned something too, that sometimes the hardest moments bring the clearest lessons, and that family, in all its complexity, is always worth the effort to understand and forgive. The days that followed Amir's wedding were quieter, but not in the way I expected. There was a lingering sense of reflection, a soft undercurrent of realization that life could pivot in a single phone call, a single choice. I returned home, unpacking my thoughts like one would unpack a suitcase after a long journey. Every item held a memory: the smell of tea from that morning, the soft hum of the city outside his apartment, the trembling of his hands as he confessed his fears. It was remarkable how small, ordinary details could carry the weight of profound moments. I found myself thinking often about the money he had withdrawn. At first, it was the immediate, visceral reaction that stayed with me: the betrayal, the panic, the fear of loss. But now, as I reflected, I understood it differently. The money was a symbol, not just of the tangible trust we shared, but of the invisible threads that held our relationship together. Amir had acted out of panic, yes, but also out of love, even if misguided, and that understanding, however painful to reach, began to shift my perception from anger toward empathy. Over the next few weeks, we reestablished a rhythm in our relationship. Our conversations became more intentional, more honest, and less guarded. I learned to ask questions that encouraged him to express his fears and ambitions, and he, in turn, began to open up without hesitation. I noticed how he seemed lighter, freer even, unburdened by the secrecy and anxiety that had weighed so heavily on him. It was as though admitting his mistakes and seeking guidance had released him from an invisible cage. One afternoon, we sat together in his apartment again, the sunlight streaming through the windows, highlighting the dust motes that danced lazily in the warm air. Amir had invited me over to discuss a new plan he had for his finances, one that was responsible, transparent, and carefully thought out. I listened as he explained, the pride swelling in my chest at the young man he had become. He had taken a shocking, reckless step, yes, but he had also learned, adapted, and grown. That growth, I realized, was more valuable than any money or convenience he had temporarily sacrificed. We laughed over small memories from his childhood, the kind that made the house feel alive with echoes of the past. The time he had tried to fix the toaster and ended up burning the toast, or the way he had begged for a puppy with those big, pleading eyes that always seemed to melt my resolve. The laughter was gentle, heartfelt, a soothing balm to the tension that had built between us. I realized then that family bonds, though tested, could endure even the most jarring surprises, provided there was honesty, love, and the willingness to forgive. Amir's marriage itself had brought unexpected lessons. I saw how he navigated disagreements with patience, how he balanced the needs of his spouse with his own, and how he applied the very lessons he had learned from the chaos we had endured together. It was humbling to witness. My son, once impulsive and panicked, now thoughtful and deliberate, carrying forward the wisdom of his mistakes into the life he was building. One evening, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I reflected on the trajectory of those weeks. What had begun as a shock, a phone call that made my heart lurch and my stomach twist, had transformed into something far more profound. It was a story of reckoning, of growth, and of the resilience of familial love. I realized that sometimes the moments that feel like the end of the world are actually the moments that teach us the most about empathy, forgiveness, and the capacity for understanding. I also thought about the conversations I would have with others, the stories I might share about this time in our lives, not to shame or judge, but to illuminate a truth many of us overlook, that love is rarely perfect, that mistakes are inevitable, and the courage to admit fault and seek reconciliation is one of the greatest gifts we can offer. I knew deep in my heart that this experience would shape not just Amir's life, but mine as well, leaving a lasting imprint on how I approached relationships, trust, and the delicate balance of letting go while staying present. By the time night fell, I felt a quiet peace settle within me. The city outside was calm, the familiar sounds of distant traffic and occasional sirens blending into a soothing hum. I thought of Amir and his bride starting their life together and felt a swell of hope for what lay ahead. Despite the chaos, despite the fear and the hurt, the lessons endured, and I understood, perhaps more clearly than ever, that the strength of family lies not in avoiding mistakes, but in confronting them with honesty, compassion, and unwavering love.
The weeks after Amir's wedding felt like a gentle unfolding, as though life itself was offering a chance to breathe and reflect after the storm. I found myself visiting his apartment more often, not out of worry, but out of a desire to reconnect, to witness the subtle ways he was settling into this new chapter of his life. Every visit revealed small details that spoke volumes: the way he carefully folded laundry alongside his bride, the tender, patient way he listened to her stories, the little routines they had created together. These were the quiet triumphs, the moments of growth that money or grand gestures could never capture. I remember one particular afternoon when we sat together on the balcony, the late sun painting golden streaks across the city. Amir had been unusually quiet, staring out over the skyline. I waited, sensing that something was weighing on him. Finally, he spoke, voice low but deliberate. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what I did, about taking the money without asking, and I realized something. What I did wasn't just reckless, it was selfish. I was so caught up in my own panic that I forgot the people who love me, the people who would have helped me if I only asked." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words, and the sincerity in his eyes told me he had truly learned to listen. I know now that trust is fragile, but it's also the most important thing we have, and I want to honor that in every decision I make from now on. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Amir, that's all anyone can ask of you," I said gently. "Mistakes are part of life. What matters is that we recognize them, take responsibility, and try to do better." He smiled, a small, humble smile, and I felt a sense of relief and pride wash over me. This was not just the same boy who had panicked on the phone weeks ago. This was a young man beginning to understand the weight of his actions and the power of accountability and love. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in how Amir approached life. He became more deliberate in his choices, more thoughtful in his words, and more attentive to the needs of those around him.
even in small matters, paying bills, planning meals, checking in with family, he displayed a quiet maturity that had been absent before. I saw in him the fruits of the lessons born from that shocking, unforgettable morning, and I realized with a mixture of relief and awe that sometimes the most difficult experiences are the ones that shape us most profoundly. There were still moments of tension, small misunderstandings that tested patience and humility, but these were different from before. They were opportunities to communicate, to listen, and to grow. The bond between Amir and me had been strained, yes, but it had not broken. Instead, it had been reshaped, strengthened by the recognition that love and trust are not static. They require care, attention, and courage. One evening, as we shared a quiet dinner together, I felt compelled to speak about the lessons I had learned through all of this. Amir, I said, voice soft but firm, I want you to remember that life will always throw challenges your way. Sometimes they will come as shocks, as betrayals, as moments that make your heart race and your stomach twist. But those are the moments that teach us the most about empathy, patience, forgiveness, and the kind of love that endures even when we falter. He nodded thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting understanding and acceptance. I continued, what matters is not that we never make mistakes, but that we face them, own them, and learn from them. And as long as we do that, we can find our way back no matter how far we stray. Amir reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I understand, Mom, he said quietly, and I promise I'll never forget it. The days turned into weeks, and life gradually returned to a rhythm that felt steady and safe. Amir and his wife settled into their home, and I watched as their relationship grew stronger, filled with shared laughter, gentle compromise, and quiet acts of kindness. I visited often, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and appreciation for the man my son was becoming. And every time I left, I felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet certainty that despite the mistakes, despite the shocks and fears, the bonds of family, tested and strained though they might be, could endure. Reflecting on everything, I realized that this experience had changed me as well. I had learned to see beyond immediate emotions, to recognize the intent behind actions, even when the outcomes were painful. I had learned the importance of patience, of listening without judgment, and of extending grace when it was needed most. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that love, true, enduring love, requires both courage and humility in equal measure. As night fell, I sat by my window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. I thought about Amir, about the journey we had taken from shock to understanding, from panic to reconciliation, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the lessons, for the growth, and for the enduring power of family, even in its most human, imperfect form. The following week settled into a gentle rhythm. Yet every now and then I caught myself reflecting on the morning of that phone call. It was strange how one event could ripple through time, changing perspectives, reshaping relationships, and leaving an indelible mark on the heart. I found myself appreciating the little moments with Amir in ways I hadn't before. The way he laughed at small jokes, the careful way he folded napkins, the way he paused to ask about my day. It was as if that shocking act of panic had opened a door to a deeper connection between us, one built not on assumptions, but on honest, heartfelt understanding. One afternoon, Amir invited me to help with a small home project. Nothing extravagant, just fixing a leaky faucet and organizing a few shelves. As we worked side by side, our conversation flowed naturally. We laughed about past mishaps, shared quiet reflections on life, and even discussed his financial mistakes openly. He admitted with humility how overwhelming the responsibility had felt and how afraid he was of disappointing me. He said, I didn't realize how much I needed your guidance until I panicked and tried to do everything alone, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I smiled softly, feeling both pride and tenderness. Amir, you've learned a valuable lesson, Asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and I'll always be here to help you navigate life, no matter how complicated it gets. Later that evening, I found myself sitting quietly in my own home, reflecting on the journey we had taken. The memory of that fateful phone call still made my chest tighten slightly, but the fear and anger had been replaced with understanding, with compassion, and with hope. I realized that life's shocks often serve a purpose. They push us to confront our assumptions, test the strength of our relationships, and teach us lessons we might never have learned otherwise. In Amir's case, the panic and secrecy had forced both of us to confront truths we had been avoiding: the importance of communication, the fragility of trust, and the resilience of love. A few days later, Amir and his wife invited me to join them for a small dinner with close friends, a celebration not of extravagance, but of shared lives, connection, and growth. As I entered their home, I noticed the care with which everything had been arranged: soft lighting, thoughtful decorations, and a quiet warmth that spoke to their personalities. Watching Amir move through the room with confidence, kindness, and attentiveness, I felt a wave of pride. The same young man who had panicked and made a reckless decision weeks ago now carried himself with a maturity and grace that filled the room with calm assurance. During dinner, we talked openly about life, about challenges, about the importance of supporting one another through mistakes. Amir shared his reflections on what he had learned, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. He admitted that taking the money had been a moment of selfishness born from fear, but it had ultimately been a catalyst for growth. I nodded, feeling the weight of his honesty. Amir, the lesson isn't about the money. It's about learning to face life with integrity, humility, and courage, and you've taken that lesson to heart. He smiled, and I saw in him a quiet pride that was not boastful, but earned through reflection and accountability. That night, after returning home, I lingered in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about the delicate balance of love and responsibility. I realized that raising children, watching them grow, and sometimes witnessing their mistakes is never straightforward. There are moments of joy, moments of despair, and moments of revelation that shape both parent and child. What mattered most was the ability to forgive, to understand, and to nurture growth rather than dwell solely on missteps. In embracing this perspective, I found a deeper sense of peace than I had felt in years. Looking back, I understood that the shock of Amir's actions, the sudden withdrawal of money, the announcement of a rushed wedding, was not just a crisis, but a turning point. It revealed the fragility of assumptions, the strength of bonds, and the transformative power of honesty and reconciliation. I had learned in vivid, unforgettable ways that love is not measured by perfection, but by the willingness to navigate imperfection with grace. As I prepared for bed that night, the city quiet around me, I felt a profound sense of closure. The events of that day, that week, and the weeks that followed had left an imprint on my heart, shaping a relationship that was more honest, more resilient, and more deeply connected than ever before. Amir had grown, I had grown, and together we had navigated a path through fear, shock, and uncertainty to arrive at understanding, trust, and renewed love. Morning arrived with a quiet clarity, the sunlight spilling gently across the floor, brushing against the edges of the furniture, and filling the room with warmth. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the calm before the day's usual rhythm began. Even now, weeks after that shocking phone call, I could feel a subtle tension beneath the calm, a reminder that life could change in an instant, that the unexpected could arrive at any moment. But I had learned to hold space for both fear and acceptance, to recognize that the twists and turns of life were opportunities for reflection and growth. Later that day, I visited Amir and his wife once again, bringing over some small groceries and a few flowers I thought would brighten their kitchen. As I stepped inside, I noticed the soft hum of activity, the warmth of shared life in every corner. They moved around each other with a sense of harmony I hadn't witnessed before. Small gestures of care and consideration woven naturally into their routine. Watching them, I felt a mixture of pride and relief, knowing that despite the rocky start, Amir was learning how to build a life with patience, respect, and empathy. We spent the afternoon talking about future plans, not just for the household, but for his own personal growth. He shared his hopes for saving responsibly, for investing wisely, and for building a foundation for his marriage that was grounded in honesty and communication. It struck me how much he had changed in such a short time. The impulsive, panicked young man who had withdrawn all the money without warning had become someone who considered consequences, sought guidance, and understood the importance of trust. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction knowing that the lessons born from that shocking moment had borne fruit. As evening fell, Amir and I moved to the balcony. The city stretched below us in a mosaic of lights and shadow. We spoke about life, love, and responsibility, reflecting on the journey that had led us here. "Mom," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "I know I scared you. I know I broke your trust for a moment. But I also know I've learned more in these past weeks than I ever thought I would." I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth and sincerity in his words. "Amir, life is full of lessons, some gentle, some harsh. What matters is that we take them to heart, that we grow, and that we let love guide us through the mistakes we make." There was a pause, the kind that held reflection, understanding, and the unspoken bond of parent and child. The night air was cool against our skin, and I could hear the faint sounds of the city below, cars moving along quiet streets, a distant dog barking, the occasional hum of a train. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, for the mistakes that it taught lessons, and for the opportunity to reconnect with my son in a way that was deeper, richer, and more enduring than before. That night, as I returned home, I carried with me a sense of peace. The shock, the betrayal, the fear, they had not vanished entirely, but they had transformed into something more meaningful: understanding, forgiveness, and growth. I realized that life's hardest moments often become its most valuable teachers, revealing truths about ourselves, about those we love, and about the resilience of the human heart. I spent some time journaling before bed, capturing thoughts and reflections that had emerged from the past weeks. I wrote about the importance of empathy, the power of honest communication, and the delicate balance between guiding and letting go. I noted the lessons Amir had learned about trust, responsibility, and the courage to face mistakes. And I wrote about my own growth, how the experience had taught me patience, humility, and the capacity to see beyond the immediate hurt to the larger picture of love and connection. As I closed my journal, the city lights glowing softly through the window, I felt a quiet assurance. Amir had grown, I had grown, and together we had navigated a path from fear and shock to understanding and reconciliation. The journey was not without pain, but it was rich with lessons, love, and the enduring strength of family. The days following settled into a quiet, reflective rhythm, yet they were far from ordinary. Every time I spoke with Amir, I noticed subtle changes in him. The careful way he approached decisions, the thoughtfulness in his questions, the gentle way he considered the impact of his actions on others. He had grown in ways I hadn't anticipated, shaped not just by the shock of that phone call, but by the reflection and responsibility that followed. It was humbling to watch, a reminder that even the most jarring mistakes can lead to profound growth when met with guidance, patience, and understanding. One afternoon, Amir invited me to help him and his wife plan a small family gathering. The occasion was simple yet meaningful, a way to reconnect with relatives and friends and share in the joy of their new life together. As I moved through the room, placing flowers on tables and arranging small decorations, I noticed the care in every detail. Amir had thought of everything, meals, seating, music, all chosen with consideration and love. It struck me how far he had come from the panicked young man who had withdrawn all the money in a moment of fear. During the gathering, I watched him interact with others. He listened attentively, offered help generously, and displayed a quiet confidence that was grounded in understanding rather than bravado. I realized then that the lessons he had learned extended beyond finances or wedding planning. They were lessons in character, in integrity, and in the delicate balance of empathy and responsibility. Every smile, every word of kindness, every small gesture spoke to a man who had faced his mistakes, owned them, and used them as a foundation for growth. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the apartment settled into a calm silence, Amir and I sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars. He spoke quietly, thoughtfully, reflecting on the journey we had shared over the past weeks. "Mom," he said, "I realize now how much I underestimated the importance of trust, of openness, of letting people in. I thought I could carry the burden alone, but I see now that asking for help is not weakness, it's strength." I smiled, a deep sense of pride and relief washing over me. "Amir, that's the greatest lesson of all. Life will test you in ways you cannot predict, but it is in those moments that our character, our relationships, and our capacity for love are truly revealed." We lingered in silence for a while, letting the cool night air settle around us, each of us reflecting on the lessons learned and the bonds strengthened. I realized that what had begun as a shocking, almost catastrophic event, the sudden withdrawal of money, the rushed marriage announcement, had become a catalyst for understanding, growth, and connection. It had forced us both to confront uncomfortable truths, to communicate more openly, and to cultivate a deeper empathy for each other's struggles. That night, as I returned home, I felt a sense of gratitude and peace. Life had a way of surprising us, of testing our patience, our love, and our ability to forgive. And yet it also offered moments of clarity, of reflection, and of profound growth, if we were willing to embrace them. I realized that the strength of family lies not in perfection, but in the courage to navigate imperfection together, to face mistakes honestly, and to nurture love even when it is challenged. As I prepared for bed, I thought once more of Amir, of the journey we had taken from panic to understanding, from fear to reconciliation. The lessons we had learned would stay with us, shaping our future interactions and the way we approached life's inevitable challenges. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood a truth I had always known deep down, but had been reminded of in the most dramatic way. Love, trust, and family endure, not because life is perfect, but because we choose to meet it with honesty, courage, and compassion. As the months passed, life softened around the edges. The sharpness of that initial shock faded into something quieter, something reflective. I no longer replayed the phone call in my mind with the same intensity, but its echo remained, not as pain, but as perspective. Amir would call me in the evenings now, not with urgency or panic, but just to talk. Sometimes it was about work, sometimes about a small disagreement he and his wife had navigated, sometimes about nothing at all. Those calls became sacred to me, proof that trust, once fractured, could be rebuilt into something even more intentional than before. One afternoon, I received a notification from the bank. My heart skipped for just a moment, an instinctive reaction I couldn't fully control yet, but when I opened it, I saw a deposit. Amir had begun repaying the money in steady, thoughtful increments, more than we had discussed, more than I expected. When I asked him about it later, he simply said, "I want to do this right, Mom, not because I have to, but because it matters." I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I just thanked him, quietly, knowing that responsibility chosen freely is far more powerful than responsibility forced. We met for lunch a few days later, sitting at a small cafe near my home. The air smelled of roasted coffee and fresh bread, and the low murmur of conversation around us created a comforting backdrop. Amir looked different to me then, not physically, but in presence. There was a steadiness about him, a grounded confidence that hadn't been there before. As he spoke about his plans, about budgeting and long-term goals, I realized that the fear which once drove him had been replaced by clarity. "I used to think being an adult meant handling everything alone," he admitted, stirring his coffee slowly. "Now I know it means knowing when to ask for help and when to listen." I nodded, watching the steam rise from my cup. "That realization," I said, "comes at a cost for most people. You just happen to learn it sooner than many." He smiled faintly, not proud, but aware. That afternoon, as we walked together down the street, I noticed how easily we moved together side by side. There was no tension, no unspoken resentment lingering between us. What remained was mutual respect, something deeper than blind trust, something earned through honesty and accountability. I understood then that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to live trapped inside it. There were moments, of course, when the memory resurfaced unexpectedly, a casual comment about money, a sudden change in plans, a quiet pause before answering the phone. But each time I reminded myself of the full story, not just the shock, but the growth that followed, not just the mistake, but the courage it took for Amir to face it, own it, and change. One evening, as I sat alone watching the lights flicker across the city, I thought about how easily this story could have ended differently. Anger could have hardened my heart. Pride could have kept us distant. Fear could have silenced the conversations that ultimately healed us. Instead, we chose dialogue. We chose patience. We chose love that holds people accountable without discarding them. I realized then that parenting never truly ends. It simply changes form. At first, you guide their steps. Later, you walk beside them. And sometimes, when they stumble badly, you stand still long enough to let them find their footing again while remaining close enough to catch them if they fall. That phone call, the one that nearly broke me, became the moment that reshaped everything. It taught me that trust is not fragile because it breaks, but because it matters. It taught me that dignity lies not in control, but in how we respond when control is taken from us. And it reminded me that love, when guided by wisdom and boundaries, has the power to transform even the most painful situations into something meaningful. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I felt no bitterness, no lingering resentment, only gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson, for the growth, and for the reminder that even when our hearts are shaken, they are still capable of healing. Before I end this story, I want to speak directly to you for a moment.
If you're listening to this and thinking about someone in your own life, a child, a partner, a family member who disappointed you, shocked you, or broke your trust, I want you to know this. Pain does not mean failure. Sometimes it means a lesson is trying to reach you in the hardest way possible. What I learned through all of this is that love doesn't disappear when trust is tested, but it does change. It becomes more intentional, more honest, more grounded in boundaries and truth. Forgiveness is not pretending something never happened. It's choosing not to let that moment define the rest of the relationship. If you're carrying resentment right now, ask yourself whether it's protecting your dignity or imprisoning your peace. And if you're the one who made the mistake, remember this. Accountability, humility, and changed behavior speak louder than any apology ever could. Life will surprise us. Family will hurt us. But healing begins when we stop asking, "How could you do this to me?" and start asking, "What can this teach us both?" Thank you for sitting with my story. And if this resonated with you, if you've lived through something similar, or if it made you reflect on your own relationships, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe Voice of Legends for more.